Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Chestnut again, and what's turning into my weekly um, COVID 19 commentary. Last week, I talked a little bit about the importance of data, that if we don't collect accurate data, then we can't conduct accurate science or have an accurate scientific conclusion. So, um, my goodness, there's such an awful lot of that going on right now. Because we're not collecting proper data, we really don't have a lot of science to do in terms of both knowing the total number of deaths or the death rate or the total number of cases, in terms of knowing anything about possible interventions from ventilators to any of the antivirals or the drugs. We just don't have a lot of data. We don't have any evidence-based interventions at this point in time to use. So the whole thing that everything that we're doing right now is based on opinion, not science. Even though everybody's saying follow the science, follow the science. Well, you have to have science to follow. You can't follow a scientist and say you're following science, because scientists have opinions. It's only proper analysis of properly collected data that can give us actually science to follow. So with that in mind, I really want to talk about understanding this relationship between COVID-19 and comorbidities, because this is an incredibly important concept in terms of to know what we're actually dealing with, to know the threat of what we're dealing with, and then to know how to gauge our response to this thing. So I'm sure what you've heard is that COVID-19 by itself has virtually no mortality attached to it. That COVID-19 by itself is not deadly. The vast majority of people who get COVID-19, whether they have a comorbidity or not, is the vast majority will survive, and they're not even hospitalized. It's really a non-threatening and non-serious illness for the vast majority of people, probably over 98%. And so what we have to ask then is, okay, so of the people that actually are who actually get very ill or die from this, and we tell people, well, COVID-19 by itself isn't deadly, but COVID-19, if you have a comorbidity, is deadly. That gets tricky if you don't really understand how this all works and how to apply proper science to this. So I want to just explain a little bit about just the basic idea of what the purpose of scientific study is, especially in healthcare. And really what we're trying to find out is we're trying to find out relationships of cause and effect. And in science, when we talk about causes, these are variables that we call independent variables. So there's independent variables, which are causes, and there's dependent variables, which are effects. So in this case, death from COVID-19 is an effect. That's a dependent variable. It depends on something else. It's an effect. It depends on a cause, which is an independent variable, which are the things that are actually causing that dependent variable or causing death. So the ultimate question is, what is causing death right now? And the other question is COVID-19 causing death? And the interesting thing to understand is that when we look at this, the data that's available, the data suggests that COVID-19 by itself is not deadly. That COVID-19 without the presence of a comorbidity does not cause death. So COVID-19 without comorbidity X, Y, or Z, just COVID-19 plus 0 equals no death. COVID-19 plus comorbidity X, Y, or Z equals death. Very low percentage of death, still very, very low percentage of people who are dying, but COVID-19 plus comorbidity X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, or Z, equals death. But here's what's interesting. Comorbidity X, Y, and Z minus COVID-19 equals death. These comorbidities are deadly by themselves without COVID-19. So then, how do we determine that an effect, a death, that has COVID-19 is caused by COVID-19 and not caused by the comorbidity? And one of the most simplest questions is, well, just separate them. Does COVID-19 by itself cause death? If it does, then COVID-19 is very likely contributing to any death where COVID-19 is present. But if COVID-19 by itself doesn't cause death, then it would be illogical to assume that a death that includes COVID-19 must have COVID-19 as one of the causal factors or contributors to that death. Now let's look at comorbidities. Do comorbidities by themselves cause death? Yes. Do comorbidities without COVID-19 cause death? Yes. So if we have COVID-19, which doesn't cause death by itself, and we have COVID-19 plus comorbidities, which do cause death by themselves. So if we have a death that includes COVID-19 and comorbidity, is that death caused by COVID-19, or is it caused by the comorbidities, or is it caused by a combination of both? And again, if it's caused by a combination of both, to what extent is COVID-19 contributing to that death versus to what extent are these comorbidities contributing to that death? A very simple way to think about this is, if someone has terminal cancer and they get COVID-19, is that a death caused by COVID-19, or is that a death caused by cancer, or is it a death caused by a combination of the two? But let's think about it for a second. If the expected life expectancy of that person with terminal cancer is 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, and they just also get COVID-19 and they pass away, how are we ever going to determine if it was the comorbidity or if it was COVID-19 that caused that death? But how does that death get recorded? If that death gets recorded as a COVID-19 death simply because COVID-19 was present, because you hear a lot of this stuff, well, we're not always sure if COVID-19 was present, but we're going to attribute some deaths to COVID-19 anyway. But let's just back up for a minute. What if COVID-19 is confirmed present, but is confirmed present with a deadly comorbidity? Is that a COVID-19 death? This is really important, because ultimately what we're trying to figure out as scientists is we're trying to figure out, does COVID-19 increase the total number of deaths in any given year or any given period of time? So if, for instance, we are having a bunch of comorbidities that would have caused death anyway in a given year, but those people have a comorbidity plus COVID-19, and that death gets recorded as a COVID-19 death, right? Then what would happen is the total number of deaths would not go up, because if we take a heart disease death or a diabetes death or an obesity death, and we attribute that, or a COPD death, and we attribute that to COVID-19, then the COVID-19 death would replace that death, so the total number of deaths in that year would not go up. If, however, COVID-19 deaths are on top of these comorbidities, then the total number of deaths in that year should go up by the number of COVID-19 deaths. We don't have that data yet. I tried to find it. I looked at the total number of deaths for the first quarter of 2020, and what I found out was there was no difference in total deaths. So we got to play this out a little bit longer, but that's a really important question to ask, because just think about it for a second. Heart disease kills 1 million people a year in the United States. Cancer kills 600,000 people every year in the United States. I got a little list here. COPD kills 100,000 people a year. Diabetes, 80,000 a year. Asthma, 4,000 a year. You've got tens of millions of people with pro-inflammatory diseases that are taking immune-compromising corticosteroids and biologics. Those drugs alone kill 36,000 people per year, but they also, all the tens of millions of people who are taking those drugs are immunocompromised, which also affects how they're going to respond to COVID-19. So those are all these comorbidities. So when you add up the deaths from all these comorbidities every year, you're at about 2 million deaths a year. There's 3 million deaths in total in the United States every year, but you're looking at 2 million deaths a year from these comorbid conditions without COVID-19. So these comorbidities, minus COVID-19, comorbidities X, Y, and Z equal 2 million deaths a year. So that's about, I figured it out here, you're looking at about 160,000 deaths a month or 6,000 deaths a day without COVID-19 from these comorbidities. So now what they're saying is, well, COVID-19 plus these comorbidities is causing death, but these comorbidities are causing 6,000 deaths a day anyway. And so the question I have is, and remember, these comorbidities are not genetic problems. These comorbidities are lifestyle-related problems almost always. These things are solvable. How are we attempting to solve them now? We are attempting to solve them with drugs that don't work, because these lifestyle illnesses are caused by poor nutrition, they're caused by sedentary living, and they're caused by stress and anxiety and a lack of self-esteem, a lack of social connection, a lack of friends, and a lack of support, all these kind of things, right? But there are no drugs despite what these pharmaceutical companies who make billions and billions of dollars prescribing drugs or getting drugs prescribed by medical doctors to treat things that are caused by lifestyle, the fact of the matter is there is no drug that can prevent or cure things caused by improper nutrition. Only proper nutrition can solve problems caused by improper nutrition. There are no drugs to solve problems caused by sedentary lifestyle, right? The only thing that can solve a problem caused by sedentary lifestyle is exercise. And there are no drugs that can solve problems caused by, no friends or no social sense of belonging or no self-esteem. It just doesn't exist. These drugs do not exist. They can treat the effects, but they can't address the cause. So when you talk about these independent variables, these causes, the independent variables in these illnesses is lifestyle choice. And so these things, I've been, again, just begging to talk about this again. I just kind of have to, please read this. All of the data and the science is in here to show that these illnesses are not genetic illnesses, but the vast, vast majority of them, over 98% probably, are, according to the peer-reviewed literature, are lifestyle illnesses. And so the drugs aren't working. Prescribed drugs are the fourth leading cause of death in the United States. These companies make billions of dollars prescribing drugs for these conditions, and these drugs do not prevent or fix these problems because they're caused by improper nutrition, lack of exercise, and improper social support, self-esteem, all the things that drugs can't provide. So I've made an incredible case for that in that book, and I just hope that you would read it and critique it, because please don't believe what I say. Check, and everything in there is referenced. So now we've got these same pharmaceutical companies, right, who have been making billions of dollars off prescribing medications and making all of healthcare virtually about prescribing medications for illnesses caused by lifestyle, which is asinine. And so, but these same companies are convicted felons. They've been just go to the, as I said last time, the Department of Justice, and Google pharmaceutical companies, or Google the name of a company, or Google pharmaceutical fraud or convictions, and what you'll find out is that these companies have been convicted over and over again for fraud when it comes to lying about the effectiveness of a drug which they know is ineffective, about lying about the safety of a drug which they know is killing people or harming people, about bribing medical doctors and journals and medical schools to promote their drugs. They're found guilty of this over and over again. And so the question I have for you is, how do you put your trust in these people to solve any of these problems if they're convicted felons? If you had a medical doctor in your community who had been found guilty over and over again over the last decades of fraud, of lying about the effectiveness of their treatment, of lying about the safety of their treatment, of lying and bribing people to get people to send them to get this treatment, which they were profiting millions or billions of dollars from, would you trust that doctor? And the answer, obviously, it's not even, you don't have to think about it. You go no. So then how do you trust these companies that are convicted felons? How do we put our trust in them to do this? And what I'm saying is, I'm not so sure we should, and I don't know for sure we can't, but if we're going to be data driven, the data says that they're convicted of fraud. And so that makes me nervous. When we're talking about comorbidities, and why are we spending all of this focus on dealing with COVID-19, which is important. Don't get me wrong. We have to deal with it. But we're ignoring the comorbidities as if somehow they're a given, as if somehow these comorbidities are somehow not plastic, that they're not, that we can't move the number of comorbidities or the seriousness of these things. So again, I just want everybody to understand that if we know for sure that these comorbidities cause death, thousands and thousands, 6,000 deaths a day without COVID-19, why are we attributing deaths, COVID-19 plus comorbidities, why are we calling that a COVID-19 death? And the only way to figure all this out is to figure out what the total deaths are. Because if we're attributing a death that would have occurred anyway to COVID-19, then the absolute number of deaths will not go up in a given time period. If we're not, if COVID-19 is adding to the deaths that are already caused by these comorbidities, well, then we won't see an increase in total deaths. But that's really important to know, because the approach that we're having right now is to get everybody to stay home. We're devastating the economy. Mostly we're devastating the impoverished. And, I've talked about this over and over again about what that does. To lose your house, to lose your job, to lose the ability to help your kids or feed them or send them ever to a college. These things are devastating. And a country that probably knows that better than any is Sweden, because they had an enormous amount of unemployment in the 90s and again in '08, but especially in the 90s. And they saw their death rate skyrocket. And that's probably why Sweden was so hesitant to do this social isolation and shut down their economy, because they know, they have the data about how devastating that is. So COVID-19 is an infectious disease. We need to take it seriously, and there are absolutely well proven ways to deal with it, like testing, find out who has it. Anybody who comes into a new area has to be quarantined and tested. We have to trace the people who are positive, who have been in contact with anybody who is positive, and we have to quarantine. Taiwan did this. They live right next door to China. They have virtually no deaths from this thing because they were prepared. So all of our agencies that we've depended on to be prepared for this thing, they dropped the ball. In Canada, they dropped the ball. In the United States, they dropped the ball. It's not about politics. It was a complete and total disaster because they were not able to do what Taiwan did. And what Taiwan did was not invented in Taiwan. What Taiwan did was follow the basic 101 playbook of how to deal with an infectious illness. But you have to have things organized in order to do it, which they did because they were prepared from the previous SARS issue that they had. So and then if you look at Sweden, so I would just say, I'm going to talk about this more next week, but I think we really have to start asking ourselves, this question about what is the cause of death. Is it COVID-19, or is it COVID-19 plus comorbidities, or is it comorbidities and COVID-19 is coming along for the ride? And the other thing we're going to have to really talk about is, what is the lifespan of the people, the vast majority of people, what is the lifespan of people who are dying from COVID-19? Are they at end of life? Are they in long-term care facilities at end of life? And so are these people have a lifespan of 30 to 90 days, regardless of COVID-19, because of these comorbidities? These are really important questions that we have to ask. And because we need science, we need data, and we need to understand. We cannot understand how deadly COVID-19 is if we can't isolate the variable of COVID-19 from comorbidities. And if we, again, I won't repeat it, but I just want people to think about that. And again, I'll talk to you next week. I hope that you're staying safe, and this whole concept of the common good and all these things we're doing, which I understand, but if you're being inconvenienced while other people are being devastated and you're calling that the common good, common good means it's good for everybody. And I really think we need to think about this, because this is not sustainable. And we've got to get proper testing. We've got to get proper tracing. We've got to get proper quarantining, and we should have done that from the bloody beginning, and we wouldn't be in this mess. So anyway, I'll talk to you next week.